Hello friends and welcome. I'm VA Adam. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to remove the instrument panel and the trim pieces on my 1972 Buick Riviera. I'll be changing some of the bulbs that I suspect have burned out in the instrument panel. So let's go around here and have a little look at the instrument panel layout. Now, if we have a look at the dashboard, it's actually basically divided into three parts. The left section has the air conditioning controls and also the light switch knob. You've got the middle section which has the speedometer and the other gauges, and then the right section which has the clock, radio and the cruise control indicator. We're going to be starting with the left section. I've already read up the process in the workshop manual. If you don't have a workshop manual, then don't worry. The manual's actually available as a PDF online. I'll link it to the section in the description below about the instrument panel. To start with, we need to disconnect the battery. That's because in order to remove the panel, we need to remove the light switch. Now, when removing the light switch, we need to pull the knob all the way out, which will turn the lights on, and we don't want to drain the battery, so it's better to just disconnect it because the lights are going to be in the on position the whole time that we're going to be working on the car. It's also a good idea to have the battery disconnected because you're going to be working around electronics. The process for removing the light switch is to pull the knob all the way out, and then somewhere on the light switch unit itself, there's a spring-loaded push button that will release the knob. To get to the light switch, we'll just have to go under and behind the dashboard so that we can see it. With the knob removed, the surround can be unscrewed. Once that's done, it's just a case of popping off the trim, and then that's pretty easily done. I've already done the right side previously and it did pop off pretty easily. The workshop manual advises removing the trim from the lower right hand side just here. Let's start by disconnecting the battery. So just pull the hood release, which in the cabin is located just to the lower left of the steering wheel. And the release catch under the hood itself is just to the right of the center point. So now that we've got this absolutely enormous hood open, we can disconnect the battery. The battery is just here on the lower left side at the front of the engine bay. We're going to be disconnecting the negative cable, and we're going to be doing that just by unscrewing this bolt. Now, unfortunately, the socket is a little bit too tight in this space. Instead, I'm going to have to use an adjustable spanner just to loosen the bolt. With the bolt loose, we can then put the socket on and unscrew it by hand. It's just a bit easier than trying to unscrew the bolt itself by hand. And now that you can see, we've got the battery disconnected. With the battery disconnected, we can pull the light switch all the way out and go under the dash to disconnect it. So here under the dash, this is the light switch that we're going to be working on. And in order to get easier access, the first thing I'm going to have to do is remove this interior light holder just to move it out of the way. It's easily done. Just use a 1/4 inch socket to remove the bolt and then just move the holder out of the way. I've located the button now to release the light switch, and I just wanted to show you where it was. I can't unfortunately point to it and hold the camera, but it is the spring that's located in the center shot here. And the process is to simply push this button and then pull the light switch knob with your other hand, and it should just come straight out of its holding. So now that the light switch is released, the next thing to do is to unscrew the surround and remove that. In the manual, it recommends prying from this bottom right-hand corner. I do have some prying tools here that I can try out. They're various shapes and sizes. So in the end, I didn't actually need any tools. What I did was I just used my fingers to get under this part, rocked it slightly, and applied some pressure, and as you can see, the whole trim piece just pulls right off. On the left side here, there's a bit of tension, so something's connected behind here. According to the manual, it's the C-light cable, which is actually a fibre optic cable. This is early scented lighting, guys. There is some slack on this cable, so I've pulled it out to give you a better view. You can see that there's some plastic clips holding the metal bracket in. I'll pop it out and you will see the metal flange that's holding it in a little bit easier. So now that the clips have been gently splayed open, you can see the metal bracket and how it was held in. Here we now have the trim panel off, and I'd like to tidy up some of this cracking if I'm able. I am just going to use some black matte enamel paint. Let's remove some of these bolts so that we can see what's going on behind here. When removing bolts such as these, there's a little tip that I can share. Loosen the bolts on diagonally opposing sides. This stuff is old and the plastic is really brittle, and we want to be as careful as possible so that we avoid any damage. So let's say that we start by slackening the top left, then the next one that we'd slacken would be the bottom right, and vice versa. The reason for this is that if you remove the bolts on just one side, then the other side is still under pressure, and that creates an imbalance. So if we just release the left side, there'll be no pressure on the left, but there'll be lots of pressure still on the right, and it will kick out in this direction. If that happens, then there's risk that these tabs could crack or break because they're brittle. Although these bolts are removed, the aircon unit is still held in here pretty tightly and I can't really see much. I will get some more of the dashboard removed so that I can get a better look at everything, and I'm going to start by removing the lower piece of this section of the dashboard. This is really, really brittle and is very, very easily damaged. You can actually see some historic damage here, and I've tried to repair this as best I can. I really can't overemphasize how delicate and brittle this is. You've got to be very, very careful when working on this section. It's very easy to remove though. You just remove the screws around here and just make sure that you've definitely removed them all, and you remove from the lower part upwards so that again it's not falling forward and you're not putting pressure on the tabs. There is also a vent hose connected to the central vent behind here. Again, just be really careful when you're disconnecting this because it can be a little bit tight. Just twist it and put it under some gentle pressure and take your time. There are some interesting connectors and bolts here that clearly hold these extra sections on, but for now I'm going to move on to the speedometer and get that removed, as I think most of the bulbs are going to be behind there. As you can see here, the speedometer glass has been removed. This was easy. There's just two screws in the top that unscrew using a Phillips number 2 screwdriver, and then you just tip the unit towards you from the top, and it can be a little bit tight against the steering column, but just use a bit of gentle force and it will pop forward. Just be careful and take your time. If we look closer there, then we can see one of the bulbs behind the speedometer unit. There are some bolts here, but I'm not sure about some of the other parts here. The manual says to put the shifter into L and remove the 3 bolts. I'll move the shifter spring first and then move the shifter to L, because if it's over to the right at L, the spring will be under quite a lot of tension. It'll be much easier to do it while it's in park. I've just reconnected the battery to see the bulbs light, and they seem okay. They're lighting up. There's some vague illumination under the dash here, and I'm not sure why that's very bright, but I'll investigate that a bit later. Now we've got the shifter spring and the cable disconnected. Be very careful when disconnecting the shifter cable. It hooks onto this retaining area. If you pull too hard, you could really easily snap this plastic. So, as always, just take your time, pull it with some gentle force, and just be really careful to make sure that you don't snap anything. I recommend leaving it in park, disconnecting the spring, then moving it to D, but then sliding the shifter the rest of the way with your hand towards L. This will give you some slack on the shifter cable. It makes it much easier when you're looping it off. When it is disconnected, just move the shifter all the way down to L just to get it out of your way while you're working. Now that we've got the bolts unscrewed, the entire assembly should be free to slide forwards. I found this interesting little sticker on the back of my speedometer, so it must have actually been out at some point and either had a problem fixed or just been serviced. I guess the guys at Scott Speedometer Service did a good job because it's been working perfectly since I purchased the Riv. Now we will just have to take these bolts off to get the gauges out and check behind them. I've just lit the bulbs here to take a look at them. As you can see, the bottom one is working, but it's a bit dim, which is what I find when I'm driving along at night. I'll be replacing all of these bulbs anyway, because I've got everything out and it's a good idea to just do it at this time. The replacement bulbs here are Lucas 501 and they're linked in the description below. These bulbs over here are not lit because they're for various warning or information sections of the cluster. In this case, as we can see from the lens, one is for the park brake and one is for the oil warning. Now the gauges are off and the lenses are out, there is just one part left, which is the high beam indicator at the top here. With all of these parts off, we can count the bulbs and see there's a total of 12 in the cluster. Getting to some of the bulbs is going to be tricky, so I'm going to have to remove these bolts and try and get the white housing out. Here is the white housing removed out of the recess, and you can see the printed circuit board here on the back that makes the connections for the bulb. Now, don't make the same mistake that I did with this unit. The bulbs are clipped in and they twist and lock into positions. So if you think it's a good idea to try and twist the bulbs out before removing the white housing, then don't. Because all that will happen is you'll twist the bulb out and then it will just fall back into the dashboard and you won't be able to get to it without, or put it back in without removing the housing out of the dashboard anyway. They're also color coded, so you won't know which one goes where. Instead, just remove the white housing and then you can take the bulb holders out much easier with the housing out. In order to remove this unit, what you first do is remove the bolts that are holding it in place. Once this is done, use a flathead screwdriver in these recesses and you twist to push the clips out. The tricky part is the speedo cable. The workshop manual is virtually no help and it simply says disconnect the speedo cable on the back of the cluster, but there's no explanation as to how to do that. It is actually quite simple when you know how to do it, and I'm going to tell you how to remove it now. So if we have a look at the cable itself, you can see that there's a lip around the metal unit, and this doesn't show up particularly well on camera, but it is there, and that is what holds it into a retaining clip. So this lip around the edge hooks into the metal retaining clip that you can see here on the back of the housing. In order to release the speedo cable, you have to push this metal retaining clip towards you. This can be done by reaching your hand up through the dashboard and feeling for it and then pushing it towards you. You can also use a hook or a panel removal tool that has a bit of a hook on it, and you can grab the metal retaining clip, pull it towards you, and then pull the white housing out. The next job that I'm going to do is give these contacts a really good clean. You can see the top contact here that I've cleaned up already, and it looks way better than the lower contact, which is still really dirty. It's simple enough to clean. You just use a fibre brush, and if you want to, some electrical contact cleaner, but it's not strictly necessary. If you've not used a fibre brush before, they're very easy. They come with refills, and when the end becomes dirty, you simply just chop the end off with some sharp cutters or scissors, and then you twist, and some fresh fibre comes out for you to clean the next bit. Here I'm just cleaning contacts up, so you can see it's making a real difference to them. And here is the finished result with it cleaned up really nicely. The contacts look way better and the bulbs will make much better electrical contact than they did before. There was originally some adhesive here holding the printed circuit board in place and it seems to have worn away. So I'm going to reapply the adhesive to keep the board held down and keep it in place better. Just a word of warning, when you're applying adhesive, make sure that it's adhesive that won't eat through the plastic, because if it does, it will bridge some connections between the copper and then that'll either cause a short or it might cause the bulbs to be on when they shouldn't be. For example, if the turn signal bridges to the main bulbs that are on when the lights are on. I've now replaced all of the bulbs with new ones and put them back in their holders and secure the holders to the unit. I believe that they're in the correct locations, but I can't be completely sure. I don't think it really makes too much difference though, as the bulbs are all the same and the holders are just simple holders. There's only one bulb holder that is slightly different shape, and I fitted that back into the correct hole because it won't go anywhere else. Something interesting to note is that here the fibre optic system provided some early scented lighting. It sits in this recess and the plastic diffuses the lighting and gives just a gentle light to this area to show you where the lights are at night. There's a similar system on the right here for the cruise indicator. The bulb for the fibre optic system that is in the housing on the cruise side is here, and I've already taken that apart and I've replaced that bulb. The one on this side actually has a couple of fibres going into it, and in order to get access you need to move the AC unit out of the way, so I'm going to show you how I did that. So if we look here under the dashboard, we can see that the AC unit was actually bolted onto this assembly together with ground wire. The fibre optic housing is here, and this housing, which holds the bulb, goes into this black unit that you can just about see here. You can see that the fibre optic cable is going into it on the right hand side. So now the fibre optic housing bulb is changed, I've put most of the left side back together. I've also put the speedometer unit back in, and I've given it a quick test and the bulbs are all lighting as they should. I've also put the clock back in. There were two bulbs in the clock, and these are slightly different, being Lucas 233 bulbs. There's one on the top left and one on the bottom right. If you're testing these bulbs, make sure that you put the bulb holder back into the clock, because the bulb holder itself grounds its connection by being in the clock unit itself. An interesting item to note is that behind here there's an empty bulb holder. This section here held the optional extra of a rear window defogger. This particular car doesn't have that option because it wasn't specified, but the bulb holder is there anyway. The factory must have done this as a bit of a cost-saving measure, where they just put it into the wiring loom regardless of whether you had that option or not. You can just about see it here with the purple and white cable. So to try and give you some useful information about putting the light switch back in, I would recommend checking out a video in the description of a gent who had an issue on a 72 Riviera light switch unit getting the light switch knob back in. He suggested pushing it at a bit of an angle, which worked really well for him. Unfortunately, that didn't work for me, but watching his video was really useful because I realised that these units can be a bit tricky. The issue was that when I was pushing the knob unit back in, it seemed to click back in, but then it would just sort of push all the way in and it would just be loose. It wouldn't actually click in and then allow you to operate the light switch. So I therefore took the light switch unit out completely, and when I took it out completely, it clicked in without any issue, which was pretty frustrating. But when I put it back in the dashboard, I had the same problem where it wouldn't click back in. So I couldn't understand what the problem was. I then realised that there was some play in the switch unit itself, and that was a problem when it was reassembled and it was actually back in place. So I'm going to try and show you what I mean under the dashboard here. So here's the light switch in the centre shot. You can see the white plastic section just about here, and the black part on the right is the electrical connector unit. It's the white plastic part that is problematic, and what I actually had to do was sort of get my finger up in between the edge of the car and the white plastic unit and just move it about a bit and then use my other hand to put the light switch knob unit back in, and eventually it just clicked back in and went back into place. So with all of this testing that we've been doing, the battery ran down a bit and I linked it up to a charger for further testing. I'd recommend that you definitely do the same, because I had some slightly unusual symptoms due to the battery being low that I didn't realise were due to the battery being low. So the symptoms were that when I put the lights on, the turn signals didn't work anymore. They worked with the lights off, but not with them on. What actually happened was I finished up overnight and I came out the next morning, everything worked fine for about 20 seconds and then it stopped working again. And that was what led me down the path of thinking it could have been the battery. So because the battery was really low and had run down, there wasn't enough power to engage the relay and be able to turn the turn signals on with the lights on. So it's really good information to have that if the battery's run a bit low, you can just put it on a charger and then everything will work fine. So you can see the foot brake light here on the left. Once the foot brake's released, that goes off. The light on the right here is the gen light. That's normal for that to be on when the key's in the accessory position. Now we've got the turn signals, right and left. Side lights on, right turn signal, left turn signal. Full lights, right turn signal, left turn signal. Finally, the full beam light indicator. The other lights won't be on as they are the hot, the oil and the temperature lights, and they won't even work because the previous owner at some point fitted aftermarket gauges and they were the sensors were disconnected. I've replaced the bulbs anyway whilst I was here. So we can now start putting all the remaining items back together. There are 4 bolts that hold the unit in place and they have the wider washer. The other parts are held in with these bolts that have the smaller washers on. When putting this back together, just grab a clean decorator's brush and give everything a nice brush off because a lot of these parts will be visible and you want to make sure they're cleaned up as best they can be. So we've got more components back in there, the gauges and the lenses, and you can see there's some wear to the rubber seals here. It's not too much of a concern, this won't be visible when everything's back together. So it's important to make sure that your speedo cable is properly located here in the holder that we saw earlier. You can just about see it in this shot, and you can see that the metal edge of the shroud is there in the retaining clip, just at the edge of the instrument cluster. Now we can put the fascia back in place, and I'll do that now. So that just pushes back in, and then there's 3 bolts holding that in place. Now the unit is back in place, and the lights are still working. I've also taken the clear plastic unit apart so that we can clean it. There are 4 bolts holding the back piece in, which are easily removed. You can see here that the chrome effect on the surround is looking a little bit tired. I have a chrome pen, which I actually bought for refurbishing wheels, but I think it would be really useful for this application. I've started touching it up just in the top here, and I'll touch it up a little now so that you can actually see how it covers these blemishes. I think it actually blends really well, and it's just going to make it look a little bit better. These pens are really cheap, and this is a really good, quick fix to make this look very nice and make it look much better than the tired old patina that it's got on at the moment. So here's the end result, and you can see it's looking a lot better. The difference between the pen and the original finish is actually much more noticeable here on the camera. When you see it in real life, and especially when it's actually in its location, the blemishes have been hidden and the differences aren't really noticeable. It's certainly a lot better than the black blemishes that were there before. So everything's back in place now. Let's just check that everything's working okay. The transmission selector works well. I can put the lights on, but unfortunately you can't tell very well in this light level that they're on, but they are. The turn signals are working here too. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it useful and that there's something in here that helped you out. If you did, or there's something else that you wanted to know, please just put a comment down below. It's always great to hear from you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And until next time, this is VA Adam signing off.